This route will not happen. We are
I've been told that we start on time. So if you could take your seat. Good morning. I guess I'm Bill Craddock, and I've been asked to introduce the speakers today. And the topic of our water, I think, is not just something we talk about. I think it has a systemic impact on our lives and our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives and for generations and generations. So I don't want to water down this introduction, but I will say, well, I think I will skip a lot of this. But water covers about 71% of the Earth's surface. 97% of the Earth's water is found in the oceans. 3% of the Earth's water is found as fresh water. And the water we drink today from our Memphis Aquifer is over 2,000 years old, from a deep aquifer. And when we think about water, we think about 60% of our human body is water. I think we just take it for granted every time we take a shower or reach down and turn on the faucet and have some water, and we drink water all day long, hopefully 8 glasses a day. But today is a special day because we'll be talking about the Memphis Aquifer. And Scott Crosby, who, as we all know, attorney Birchport and Johnson, has been involved with the aquifer, dealing with a lot of the litigation, and has been doing most of this pro bono and just been a terrific asset for Memphis in a very, very quiet, low-profile, subtle, but effective way. And also, we have Sarah Houston, who I understand is a water warrior. But she's executive director now of Protect Our Aquifer and has been that for, 4 months, I think, something like that. But she has a background in peddling a passion for water in the academic, corporate, and nonprofit sectors for over 10 years. And she's been involved with a position at the University of Memphis as a leading aquifer research center. And Sarah supports proactive management to ensure the sustainability of our community's water supply. I can't wait to hear her talk. Yesterday, she did a TED Talk at the Levitt Shell, which I think we could call up if we stream it. I missed it, but I would have loved to have heard that. But we're going to hear her in person here. And I would like to welcome Scott to move forward with the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. My words are going to be a little bit all over the map, so to speak, to talk about my role in the litigation and how I got involved in helping the lawyers involved and the activists and the knowledge community in stopping the Bahia Pipeline from coming through Memphis. I wanted this is the only map I want to talk about, and this might be my only slide, and then the substantive part about where our aquifer is, how does it work, how long has it been here, the sand layers, what are the risks to it, what is your role going forward, is going to be Sarah. But I want to get a little bit of background on the litigation, and then I want to just lift up something that I think is dear to our hearts with Calvary, which is the role of the individual and what we can each do. And I think what we try to do as members in Calvary, and that we intentionally come to this space every Sunday and in between. So Bahia Pipeline was a non-asset LLC company that was formed by two Texas gigantic billion-dollar companies. So they formed an assetless company to come in and build this particular pipeline. This is the one that was proposed up here. So the Valero refinery is on President's Island. Calvary Church, if you go north, we're kind of where the P is in the word pipeline. So that's the Valero refinery. The Diamond Pipeline is coming from Oklahoma, comes into the Valero refinery, and there's a current low-pressure oil pipeline that comes through Memphis, currently right now, hooks down by the airport, then comes through here, hooks up with a large oil pipeline, comes from Illinois, goes down to Louisiana, and then gets refined in Louisiana and exported to the world. Valero, it's a little bit of a misnomer that they're a refinery for this particular litigation fight about this pipeline. There was never going to be any oil brought from Oklahoma refined in Memphis, ever. It was simply the oil pipeline already built was going to come to the Valero refinery, hook down into this proposed pipeline, come across to this already built cap line and go into Louisiana. We were always curious why they didn't just expand their current easement, and when you'll hear in a minute, we learned why they didn't want to use that current easement. As you can see, it goes through our middle of town and cuts across here in other parts of East Memphis, Collierville and Germantown that might have had a little bit more power base to stop, and I think they just, at the beginning, decided that's not the way they wanted to go. So Bahia Pipeline, as this assetless LLC, began purchasing easements in Memphis and in Mississippi as early as 2017. They still own about 52 easements along that little part of the dotted oil pipeline coming from the refinery to the south. We're hoping that eventually we can purchase those back, but currently they own about 52 easements. And while they were not secretly, because they were doing it openly, they were buying the land, and they were having homeowners sell easements to their property in that part of town. They were doing it without a lot of publicity, and people didn't really know. And I read those contracts, and the easements were being purchased for somewhere between about $500 and maybe $5,000. And what the property owners were giving away was a permanent right to Bahia Pipeline to put a 24-inch high-pressure crude oil pipeline. This is not refined oil. This is the crude oil pipeline that you see is when you look at oil spills on the coast. That's the oil. It's not gas. It's crude oil pipeline that's come through there. And that pipeline is going to go through their front yard, and it has the right under the contract to be there for eternity. They can abandon it in place. They never have to get it out. And the homeowners have signed away any damage claims. So the pipeline was going to be built. They can never build over it. They can never disrupt the land, and so they sell their land for $500 to about $5,000. So Bahia Pipeline had successfully purchased about 95% of that dotted line until the fall of 2020, when in Boxtown, which is an area in 38109 near Westwood and West Junction, this area right in here, right in there, 38109, kind of near T.O. Fuller Park. There's a couple of community meetings, and at those meetings, there were some questions asked about why did you choose this particular path? Why didn't you go through the middle of town? Why did you come through our neighborhood? And luckily, the land agent who was hired to purchase all of these easements and to negotiate, he had a fit of honesty, unfortunately, for the pipeline. And he said, well, we chose this path because we believe it's the path of least resistance. And that fired up some people in the meeting, including a woman named Kizzy Jones and another woman named Kathy Robinson. After that meeting, a couple of things happened that were just critical in the community activism and the community organization to stop this pipeline. Two things in particular happened. One, Kathy Robinson went home, and she's an African-American woman, born and raised in that neighborhood. She went home and said, I need to know more about this pipeline. So she got online and began to follow hashtag Byhalia Pipeline, hashtag Plains All American, which was the Texas oil company. She began to follow Texas Oil, the Plains All American, on Twitter, and she woke up the next morning and Plains All American had followed her back, and Plains All American followed one person on the globe, and it was Kathy Robinson. Obviously, it scared her a little bit that this company would care about her. Why are they beginning to follow her? So she began to talk about it with her friends, including a guy named Justin J. Pearson. And Justin J. Pearson is an African-American, 26-year-old valedictorian of Mitchell High School, went on to become a scholarship student at Bowdoin College up in Maine. He studied in South Africa, studied in Princeton. He's now living back in Memphis, and he started a group called Memphis Community Against the Pipeline, which was just flat-out community organization. And through his efforts, y'all probably saw in the paper, he got Al Gore here, he got William Barber here, he got Jane Fonda involved, he got CBS News that came in and interviewed some of the landowners. He was remarkable, and he lifted up what was happening. And as a part of that, what was happening, not only was there community activism going on, an organization to stop it, but there also had to be a role of lawyers involved because the Bahia Pipeline company was continuing to try to purchase land, and when they couldn't, starting also in the fall of 2020, they began to sue landowners in that neighborhood who would not sell their property, claiming they had the right to take their property under eminent domain. Eminent domain, as you may know, is generally used if if they want to build a new street in your neighborhood, or if they want to put I-40 around your house, that's just going to happen. And they can take that land, they give you your fair market value, and they use the land for public use. So this company wanted to come into Memphis, take people's property against their will, pay them pennies on the dollar, take their land forever, leave a pipeline in their land forever, and say that it was for public use, even though the oil was never going to stop in Memphis. So when those individuals got sued, Protect Our Aquifer, and you will hear more from Sarah later, and she has the cards on your table. Protect Our Aquifer already had a relationship with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and the Southern Environmental Law Center is an environmental law group based out of Charlottesville, Virginia. It's operating in 6 states. It has about 80 lawyers, and one of their senior attorneys in Nashville is a guy named George Nolan, and he and I happened to go to law school together at Virginia, and so he called me up and said, some of these individuals have been sued in Memphis. This was in around Christmas of 2020. And he said, we can't represent individuals. Would you mind helping? And I don't think it's going to be much time. I think it's going to be pretty easy. We'll do the heavy lifting if you'll help us out. And I said, sure. So we got involved in beginning of January 2020. And I don't want to overstate it, but some of our beginning work just seemed wonderfully providential because we thought we were going to have an early hearing, and I wasn't prepared. I didn't do this kind of work, and I was like, yeah, we'll have this hearing. We'll, hopefully we'll win, and it looks like a lot of the law is on their side, and I hadn't really researched it yet. And luckily, the day before the hearing, the circuit court over here took all of the 15 lawsuits and said, we're going to stop all of the lawsuits. We're going to coordinate them in a organized fashion. We're moving them into one court. We're going to hear them on a regular basis, and we're going to have a very organized way to hear them. It was fabulous. It's the way it should have happened. And Division I, Felicia Corbin Johnson, just handled the hearings in a wonderful way. And we had the next hearing set for February. And again, I wasn't, I guess, wising up to what was happening. And we were going to have the other hearing, the next hearing, and if y'all remember, it snowed for 10 days, 2 feet in this town, or whatever it was. And the courts closed. Couldn't have the hearing. By that time, we're getting our sea legs, and we're getting much more knowledgeable about what's happening, and much more aggressive in our papers and much more aggressive in our language in court. And ultimately, as you probably read in the paper, Bahia Pipeline did abandon all of their litigation, has dismissed all of their eminent domain lawsuits, and have stated in SEC papers and in papers to Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation and also to the Army Corps of Engineers that they are not going to build the pipeline. I feel like pipelines are a little bit like the monster in Halloween movies. You're like, I just don't know if you're dead. So I'm not really sure if that's what's going to happen, but we're hoping that it will. I wanted to raise just a couple of other comments before I hand it over to Sarah. One is what I learned about this work in the pipeline is just I was reminded of the power of the individual, because at no time did business come to the aid of any of this. The Chamber of Commerce was, I guess, at best indifferent, at worst obstructionist. This is a company who was going to come into town, threaten our water, bring no jobs, bring no economic stimulation, nothing. Just wanted to pass oil through our property. But 2 of the members from Bahia Pipeline had joined the Chamber of Commerce and paid $25,000 each to join the Chamber Circle. And they had a lot of power. And so the Chamber of Commerce never spoke up. To this date, there's no ordinance, there's no law, there's nothing on the books that stops the pipeline. It was just the role of the individual. And while we were working on it, Don Wade of the Daily Memphian sort of put together this idea of the women who helped stop I-40 from coming through Overton Park 50 years ago, and the role of the individual. And he connected that to the role of the women, again, it's women, Kizzy Jones and Kathy Robinson, who were the ones who said, I don't want this pipeline through my neighborhood. I have no idea what it is, but it just can't come here. And he connected both of those. And through that, I learned more about, again, the role of the individual and the lack of government and the lack of business support or vision in our city that has plagued us 50 years ago and plagues us today. But also back in 50 years ago, the press was very much against what was happening through Overton Park. Luckily, we had some press that were in favor of our role, not Daily Memphian or Commercial Appeal initially. It first came through an independent news source called MLK 50. And if you're interested in any type of fabulous journalism, look that up. In fact, one of their journalists is a 23-year-old African-American named Carrington Tatum from Texas, who moved here on a grant and wrote multiple articles on this and is now won a very esteemed national nonprofit journalistic award for all of his work. It's really fabulous. But I wanted to read this one article, or one little piece from the environmental, about the I-40 work through Overton Park and how the press was against it. This is written by Jesse Merrill, associate editor of the Commercial Appeal, who said, just as the rabble-rousing street mob clamored for the head of Jesus in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, so have the environmentalists who, through lengthy litigation, have blocked construction of Interstate 40 and spilled the blood of innocent victims. Quote, they can smear the blood on their hands, says the president of Pollard Constructions. The spilled innocent blood is that of those unfortunate individuals killed on overcrowded Memphis streets who would still be alive if the expressway had been built through Overton Park. Strong stuff. It just takes a lot of nerve to stand up to power. And one of the women I want to leave you with before I turn it over to Sarah is one of the people that I also got to know through this effort was Scotty Fitzgerald. Because, as I mentioned to you, 52 landowners had already sold. About 15 people were sued by Bahia Pipeline, an eminent domain, a nonprofit, a couple of companies. They were really just wanting to negotiate. And then about 9 individuals, and of those 9, the only 2 who really stepped up and just said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to appear in court. I'm not going to let you build through my property. One was Scotty Fitzgerald. She's an African-American woman from Boxtown, lived there her whole life. She's 68 years old, appeared on CBS News fabulously. She's just a wonderful woman. And during the work, she filed a declaration in court that was just telling her story and why she was against the pipeline. I'm going to read just a little bit of it. I own property. This is Scotty Fitzgerald's words. I own property at 5327 Weaver Road in Memphis. This piece of property has been connected to my family for 4 generations. My grandparents lived on this property. My mother purchased it, and now I co-own this land with my daughter. Bahia Pipeline has sought to get an easement over my property. After repeated attempts to purchase it, all of which I refused, they sued me in circuit court. Now, growing up, I remember frequently visiting my grandparents at this home. The house was small, resembled a boxcar. For several years, they did not have running water on their property. And I remember drinking water from a well located across the street from the house. The water pumped from that well, sweetest water I ever drank. Cold, fresh, tasted amazing. And growing up, I also remember spending time with my grandparents inside their house. We would roast peanuts over a fire. And I remember sitting by the warmth of that fire, eating peanuts, feeling like our lives were rich in all the ways that mattered. She goes on for 5 pages. It was effective, and the judge listened, and I think the other side knew where this was going, and they dismissed her lawsuits. As I hand it over to Sarah, though, what I wanted to highlight is, regardless of this work, regardless of the fact that this pipeline that is hooked down through Mississippi, through South Memphis, regardless of the fact that currently it's not going to be built, to this day, there's no ordinance, there's no law, there's no regulation, there is nothing on the books in Memphis, Tennessee that protects the water we drink. Nothing. The federal government does not support it. The state does not regulate it. There's not anything that supports what can happen with the pipeline that might go through the property, might be built through the aquifer or over the aquifer. And that is where Protect Our Aquifer comes in. And what we learned from Ward Archer, who is the head of that organization, has been at it for years, was John the Baptist in the wilderness, just yelling about it, and no one listened. But people are going to listen to Sarah. And Protect Our Aquifer goes forward trying to get protection, trying to raise the information, raise the knowledge base about how at risk our water source is. So Sarah, I want you to come on up, and we'll have some questions at the end.
Thank you so much. And I think we can leave that there. All right. Well, I got goosebumps about 5 different times during that presentation, and Scott's work was absolutely critical to not only, really bringing this project to an end, but really just the peace of mind for these landowners that were borderline terrorized throughout this process. And I mean, just feeling hopeless, and Bridgeport Johnson and Scott's work was just, I think, such a reassurance to them that somebody's watching out for me. So thank you. Thank you for that on behalf of them and all of us, because it was like we had got a lot of people in our corner. So like Scott said, I'm the executive director of Protect Our Aquifer, and Ward Archer, he formed us up back in the end of 2016 and thought this was going to be a short-lived, year-long kind of legal fight against some of these wells that went in next to TVA's unlined coal ash pits, formed up for that, and then realized, just as what Scott said, there's nobody really out there looking out for our aquifer system. And so 5 years later, they hired me, first executive director of the organization, and we've got goals, dreams, and schemes. So I'm gonna grab that clicker. All right. So before I leave this slide, I just want to point out, I got a laser. This right here, these bubbles you see, these are well fields. So these are areas in our county where water is pumped and extracted from the ground. And the kind of box shape, that's like the physical footprint, and then the bubble shape around it is the travel time. So when water is pumped, it creates this vacuum. Think about when you drink out of a milkshake, you kind of create that cone depression. And so that bubble is water's being pulled from outside of the actual physical footprint of the well field. And so this whole land area becomes a more vulnerable place where contamination can get pulled in. And so what these are called are our wellhead protection zones. And as you can see, Byhalia Pipeline was planned to route directly through the Davis well field, which is where the water supply comes from for all Southwest Memphis and users on President's Island. So not a best management practice to have a high pressure source of contamination directly through your well field. So that just at face value was a really terrible idea. So, I think we gotta get that message off to use the clicker. So I think we gotta, can I remind me later? This right here, okay. Just a second. Okay. Oh, the mouse is down there. Well, while she's doing that, Protect Our Aquifer formed up, but I actually started my career in Memphis here 3 years ago at the University of Memphis Caesar. So we are the research center that is primarily looking at our water supply, and during the role, oh, you're fine, during Byhalia Pipeline, when that all came to fruition, that's where I was working. And it was difficult for me personally because when you're in academia, you kind of have to stay your lane. At least that's the approach that the university takes in a lot of these roles. And so obviously going through the well field, not best practice. There were some concerns where it actually goes through our recharge zone. I'll be talking about that. But I, as an individual, felt very limited on what I could say. And we had meetings with Mayor Strickland, we had meetings with many different legislators, and we were able to, talk about the science and the issues and the concerns. But I felt like there's a much broader thing beyond just that specific science. And so I got this opportunity to, come work for Protect Our Aquifer and be able to connect our social, our environmental, and our political realms together. And I am just forever grateful to be able to be in that position. So, of course, I got to give you a little geology lesson while I'm up here. So I'm going to talk about our aquifer system in general. Who's in charge? And we got the question or the answer, but nobody. And then just some of the kind of current issues and some of the things that we're up to right now. So our Memphis Sand Aquifer is actually part of this massive system called the Mississippi Embayment. And so this light blue outline, this is the full footprint, and you can see it spans 9 states. The layer that our aquifer is that blue layer, that darker blue layer. And what happened was 70 million years ago, we had a volcanic hotspot below ground here. And it sat for a second where the land rose up. It got so hot, it rose up, and then our tectonic plate moved. And when it moved, it cooled the land. And it created this trough-like depression where then the Gulf of Mexico was able to flow in and out and in and out. And so this started forming 70 million years ago when there was still dinosaurs walking the earth. Then, throughout that process, there was deposited these layers of clay, sand, clay, sand, clay, sand, clay. And then this top layer we have is more silts and fine gravel from river and wind deposits. And so we actually have many aquifers below Memphis. So this shallow aquifer is directly below our feet. Usually the water table is going to be somewhere in depending on where you are, 40 feet down to 150 feet down. But that's not the water we drink. That water is known to be contaminated in quite a few locations, and it has a more silty, muddy look to it anyway. Then we've got this clay layer that has been our saving grace for a very long time, that acts as this protective barrier, and it also pressurizes the aquifer. So this next layer you see is the Memphis Aquifer, and then we also get quite a bit of our water, especially out in the eastern regions, from the Fort Pillow Aquifer. This is very similar quality, still a sand aquifer. And you'll notice this recharge zone. So the land gets higher as you go out to the east, and our sands actually come to the surface, where we have more direct rainfall recharging our aquifer. And when this aquifer was discovered, and they finally, in 1886, punctured through this clay layer, the aquifer was under so much pressure, it gushed to the surface like an oil gusher, and it came up 7 to 10 feet. And that was happening actually just a few blocks from here. And this aquifer was beautiful, cold, clear. At the time they were relying on the Wolf River for their water. So this was looking a lot nicer than that. But over the years, we have lowered that water surface drastically, over 100 to 120 feet lower, just due to the usage from all users in the county. And so one thing that has been discovered over the past few decades that we're really learning more and more about every day is this clay layer that separates that shallow aquifer from the Memphis. And there's actually now discovered naturally occurring breaches or windows, just gaps, where rivers have eroded through 10,000 years ago. Maybe there was a little bit of an earthquake and there's a fault. There's now a connection between this shallow aquifer and this Memphis aquifer that we never knew before. And what this kind of looks like is, let's say you have a leaking underground storage tank, which we have many, many of those in Memphis, where think of like a gas station tank underground. Those things crack, leak eventually. We have many of those. But when your clay layer is intact, that pollution just kind of move horizontally. Doesn't have that venue. But when we have a gap or a window or breach, and I say all of those words because MLGW, Caesar, everybody uses their own little terms, but it's this gap in the clay layer. It creates this connection, and especially if there is a well nearby pulling water towards it, it's going to pull contaminants with it. So there's a big $5 million study that MLGW and Caesar are working on together. If you have an MLGW bill, 1.05% of your water bill is going to that study, and it's really trying to determine where these breaches are and how that's all connected. So this is a map currently of the known breaches. And these are all maps and figures I created while I was still at Caesar. So I pulled them over to my B-roll. So we kind of have a sense of where some of these are. And these are just vulnerable areas. And so these are areas that we would like to see have an extra layer of protection when it comes to new land uses. Now that we know of these vulnerable areas, there's already contamination in a lot of these places like this. So we've got known contaminants, potential contaminants. Some of these might be small. Maybe it was a small leaking gasoline tank and 15 gallons spilled. Some of these are much, much larger. And there are the ones that are actually labeled, those are Superfund sites. Shelby County is home to over 10 Superfund sites that are on a very high priority list, being a very toxic chemical is leaching into our ground, soils, and in the air. And so we have a special place where we have a lot of industrial development that started 100 years ago. And before the EPA was formed, that's really the concerning stuff. It's not stuff that goes in last year, because there was regulations that have to deal with how to dispose of that better. A lot of the pollution we're talking about is old stuff. And you'll see I kind of have the well fields and the breaches. And so when Protect Our Aquifer is thinking about our top priorities moving forward, we're in the process of figuring those out, because there's a lot of priorities and there's only so much time in the day. But we're looking at areas where you've got a breach, you've got a well field, and you've got contamination. When you have those three things in line, that to us is something that needs to be higher prioritized in our cleanup and our remediation. And so things like out by the University of Memphis, we have an old dry cleaners that dumped TCE, which can cause neurological disorders, into the soil between the 1940s and 1990s. It was only discovered in the early 2010, 2013 range how much of this chemical had leached into the soil and is now in the groundwater. And the groundwater plume is gone through the breach and is moving its way towards the well field at Sheehan. That's not good. EPA's involved, TDEC's involved. Yes?
Can I ask you a stupid question?
Absolutely.
Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Chinatown, but it was based on a real event.
Right.
And I lived in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I didn't live in Los Angeles when that happened.
Right, right.
And Jack Nicholson's gotten 9 Academy Awards, but that's not the point. The point is this. Raleigh Springs has better water.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you just, like a pipeline from Raleigh Springs down to here, you know, there used to be a trolley to Raleigh Springs then.
Yep.
But the water was so good.
Raleigh Springs is coming from the same aquifer. And yep, same aquifer, and Raleigh Springs has reduced its spring flow drastically because there's not a lot of water coming up to the surface anymore. So back in, when we originally discovered our aquifer, actually very close to here.
Down there, down the street.
Correct.
On the corner of Danny Thomas and
Yep, exactly, you know. And so the aquifer was under so much pressure, they didn't have pumps. They actually had, the pipes came about 20 feet or 10 feet below ground and actually had an upward gradient to where the distribution system was because the pressure would just move it there. And so now we've had to retrofit, obviously we've built a lot more well fields, but we've had to retrofit and actually put mechanical pumps on there, you know, running off of energy to actually suck the water up high enough because...
that falling water is over on the
Yep. You'll see the aeration stations, a little waterfall looking thing, and that's actually to introduce oxygen and reduce iron content from the aquifer because it's been pressurized underground so long. It needs a little extra bubbles, it needs a little extra oxygen. And so yeah, you'll see that on North Parkway, the Mallory pumping station. That's this one right here. They're doing some upgrade. MLGW is doing some upgrades on that too. And so when we treat our water, it's very simple. We aerate it, add a little oxygen, get that iron out. We add chlorine, fluoride, and phosphate. And the phosphate is to coat our old pipes and it degrades pretty quickly. But that's it. That's all we do that's all we do. There's one sand filter it goes through after that. That's it. You go to a surface water system, there's coagulation, flocculation, they're doing all kinds of stuff. We don't have to do any of that here because our water is just so good. So this animation, if it works, will kind of show how the Memphis Sand Aquifer has depleted since its discovery. And it goes through 2038, so you can kind of see a future forecast. Now, let's see if this will go. There we go. So this is from a study that was done in the early 2000s. And so what these are these cones of depression starting to form. And so you can see Louisiana has a massive one going on over here. And water in Louisiana isn't going to necessarily impact us over here. This is a humongous formation. But you can see where we are, we've made this massive depression that's starting to form. And if you're familiar at all, that we have been sued by the state of Mississippi v. Tennessee, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. I won't get into the juice of that, but it's been really exciting, mostly because they blamed us for stealing their water. We're like, this water actually naturally flows to us. Tennessee has been, it's looking like the case is going to go in our direction, but what the probable outcome is going to be is that Mississippi, if you're really concerned about water use, you need to draft up a compact. We have compacts with rivers. There's the Colorado River Compact out west between 7 states that was formed in 1922, all under the equitable apportionment concept. And so if they wanted to get serious, they could form a compact with us, but to protect our aquifer, we don't want it just between 2 states because this is a multi-state region. What happens if Arkansas starts to pump massively? That could impact our water too. So if we want to get real serious, this needs to be at least a 3-state, if not broader, compact. That's worked for the next couple decades. I think it will happen, but right now we're really focused locally. Now I want to turn our attention on kind of the quantity side a little bit, this recharge zone. Remember, I brought that up over here. Here's what it looks like from a bird's eye view. It's this massive swath of West Tennessee. And if you look over here, it's the only place in this 9-state region where the sands come to the surface. So our land in West Tennessee is critical for recharge and long-term sustainability. We've all heard about this new Ford's going into this mega site in West Tennessee, producing electric vehicles, batteries, a big trade school is going to go in. It's really exciting. But we're a little nervous because it is on the recharge zone. And it's not so much the footprint of the new Ford plant and the mega site. They will be water users. Right now they're talking about closed loop systems and high efficiency and good water recycling. That's music to our ears. So we want to see that followed through, and we'll be very involved in the permitting process to ensure that happens. But our concern is what happens with the suburbanization, with the growth of this region and paving over the recharge zone. Because then that rain can't enter the ground anymore and it can't recharge to the same rate. So we're at the beginning stages of this, but we're trying to figure out a game plan. And a lot of that is going to be, starting to work with folks out in this region, and it's going to be a lot about zoning laws and how the land is developed, keeping our streams intact instead of straightening them and lining them with concrete. Because streams are where the rain gets in, it can actually push and flow into the aquifer. So how do we keep some of these basic functions occurring still while also allowing the region to develop and grow? Because it's happening, it's gonna happen. So that's on the to-do list. So who's in charge? So going back to Shelby County specifically, when it comes to the broader full embayment, nobody at all. It's very much, state EPA. So for example, Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, they are our main regulators when it really comes down to quality. So your drinking water quality, those reports, that kind of information, they work on remediation for some of these cleanup sites, but it's very kind of piecemeal and very broad picture. When it comes to actual management, how is pollution moving? How does pumping affect this? Who's going to say anything about the Byhalia Pipeline? Is this smart? Is this a good idea? Should they change the route? What's the deal? No one is doing that. We do have some regs that aren't really being followed. The Shelby County Health Department has a sub-department that does pollution control, but they're pretty much doing well permitting and septic system install. And that's the scope of their actual work these days. They're supposed to secure, protect, and preserve the quality and quantity of groundwater. That sounds great. We'd love that. But those regs were written at the end of the 1980s, 1990 is when they actually formed up. The Shelby County Groundwater Quality Control Board is kind of like the Land Use Control Board, in theory. And it's this board by a handful of engineers and well drillers and municipal water utilities, and they get it together every once in a while and they just approve permits. They're not doing science, they're not doing any studies, they're not providing any, there's no technical staff. Well, that's not true. There's 2 technical staff, but it's not functioning in the same way the Land Use Control Board is. Regular meetings, staff of 10, lots and lots of investigation going on. This is just kind of a stamp and go. And that's what happened with the TVA wells back in 2016, where they drilled 5 freshwater wells approved by this board right next to these unlined coal ash pits where sinking arsenic, lead, and fluoride into our groundwater. And they were like, yep, sure, looks good, here you go, filled out the paperwork correctly. And that's when Ward was like, I don't know, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And Scott Banbury with the Sierra Club tried to sue about this, but since Sierra Club is based in California, the judge threw the case out because it didn't have local standing. So Protect Our Aquifer and Ward, they formed up, board got involved, filed the 501c3 papers, became a legit organization real quick in order to join this lawsuit. And that's when Ward thought, okay, well, we're just going to do this thing real quick and we'll move on. And more problems have been revealed to him and to our board and the community, the greater community. So there are a few employees, there's no budget, there's no consultants, there's no additional assessments or studies. So it's really just flawed system at face value. So what we're really trying to do at Tva Aquifer is looking at a holistic water management system that's going to bridge the policy, the science, and the actual operation. So we're doing the best we can, because right now we're not. And so really, we're focused on Shelby County now. We're going to start bumping up our prospects into West Tennessee with this new mega site going in. And we see the need for greater management for the broader Mississippi embayment, but I'm a staff of one, so we'll get there. We'll get there. So a couple current issues, and then we'll leave time for questions. But these are kind of our hot topic list right now. So right now, TDEC, as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, part of the $1 trillion package, TDEC has been awarded $1.35 billion for water infrastructure improvements across the state. Yay. I am very pleased that I was appointed to this committee to help with advising those dollars. I show up in Nashville, they were like, here's the plan, please be an ambassador. We're like, well, we got some questions actually. We're not ready to just sign on wholeheartedly. And right now, the way they have this funding formula that is purely based on population and a flat rate. And Shelby County is slated to receive the least dollars per person across the state. And Justice 40 is an executive order that President Biden signed that actually has a goal of 40% of federal dollars go to disadvantaged communities. And those disadvantaged communities, there's a definition developing, but it is underserved populations, people of color, those living in toxic areas, people that have been disproportionately impacted by development over the past couple centuries. Memphis is prime for that 40%, and the funding formula does not reflect Justice 40 executive order at all. And so we just put in comment letter and had a lot of great citizen supporters also put in comment letter and say, we would like to see this formula retooled completely so that we get our fair share. So we're working with City of Memphis, MLGW, County to figure out how to do that. So that'll be coming down the road continually. That was step one of like 8 steps. So that's happening. We have some information on our website about that. Second, strengthen local laws. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but like Scott said, we don't have a lot of laws on the books. We did, as a part of this process, we got 2 laws passed, so our coalitions will get some wins. One of them has been this wellhead protection zoning law, where those bubbles that I showed you earlier, those areas now have a law in the city where only certain types of land uses can go in. So crude oil pipelines, gas stations, dry cleaners, things that have a lot of chemical storage on site have to get a special permit to be built there, or they just need to go outside of this boundary. And so that starts to be able to get a sense of what kind of land use do we want to develop in these really vulnerable areas. We got to win. It's a baby win, but we got one. There is another law up for vote on Tuesday that would create a 1,500-foot setback for crude oil pipelines. And this has been this is a law that Mayor Lee Harris wrote up. I don't even know, it's been a long time. Yeah, February, okay, yes. It's like, it's 2021, but like the beginning. And so the county has passed it, so now unincorporated county will have a 1,500-foot setback for crude oil pipelines near homes, schools, parks, and religious institutions. Like, well, what? That sounds good to us. There's still a special permit process, so if a crude oil pipeline wanted to come through town, they have to apply, and so we would know the route. It wouldn't be this kind of secret thing unveiled the last minute when it's a done deal. So we're trying to put just some blanket things in place as stepping stones to this broader management authority that we are really hoping for. Then we've got this Tva Coal Ash Cleanup. So this is going to be real fun. We got 10 years of this. So this is a picture of what coal ash cleanup looks like. We have 2 massive pits in southwest Memphis where TVA burned coal for about 70 years, and the fly ash was just dumped. Unlined pit, that's just how they built it back in the 50s, unfortunately. And the stuff contains radioactive materials, arsenic, lead, fluoride. It's not good stuff. And it's actively leaching into our groundwater. And there's a breach there. So we know it has a path to our aquifer. So TDEC, TVA, and others are working on a cleanup plan. So they're going to be actually excavating this and moving it to a landfill. And right now the proposed landfill, or the landfill that is built, is in South Shelby. It's in South Memphis. Our city council members are not super excited about that. It is, I'm not great with my streets, but it's Shelby Drive, if Capelville, does Capelville? Yeah, so Capelville, it's trucks. Yes, trucks. And these are supposed to be specially built trucks with a side loader and an arm that keeps the dust down. It's going to be a messy process. And communities across the country are starting this because as coal transitions, we've got a lot of these unlined pits. But we're actually one of the first ones in Tennessee to be going through this process. So we're starting to talk with other organizers around the state that have been involved in coal ash, like Kingston spill. That was a horrendous thing in the sense that there was a major incident they had to respond to. This is a controlled, planned execution. So we're a bit more hopeful of, good health and safety for workers. But we are concerned about the route and potential, dust in the air and impacting the community there. So we're working with our group at MCAP and Southern Environmental Law Center and trying to determine our strategy for that. So there will be a public meeting that we're planning to host on that. We don't have a date yet, but it'll be virtual. I'll definitely share the information. Scott will have it and can share with y'all. But it just is something that we need to be aware of, and how do we ensure the community knows if they see black dust flying out of a red truck, here's the hotline to call. Here's what we need to tell. So because we need to be diligent about enforcing the laws that we have. That's the trick. Did you have a question, sir? Okay. And I spoke on the development of the Ford mega site. So we've got some plans. We're starting to talk with some other folks across the state. And then we're looking to build our remediation priorities. What's going on right now? Is there ways to move faster? What are those threats, and how do we contain that contamination so it doesn't make its way to our incredible drinking water supply? So here's some opportunities to get involved. Like I said, on Tuesday, there's a city council vote, and the chambers are open to the public, which is exciting. So if y'all want to come, you can show support by just physically being there. If you want to make a public comment, there's a little comment card. You have 2 minutes, and you can just talk about, and we've got talking points we can share, and also just, why, our aquifer means something to you. And it's really good for those legislators to hear from their constituents, because it just is. And then we have some fun events coming up. So we also do fun stuff. It's not all just scary, mean stuff. We've got a really cool coffee event. It's the Grind City Coffee Expo happening at Wiseacre downtown here on November 6th. It's going to be a big celebration of the Memphis coffee scene, and you can't have good coffee without good water, so the proceeds are benefiting Protect Our Aquifer. And then on December 5th, we're going to have an acoustic Sunday concert at First Congo Church in Midtown. That's produced by Bruce and Barbara Newman, and it's going to be a fun lineup. We got Will Kimbrough, Livingston Taylor, Shamika Copeland, Al Capone. It's all going to be acoustic, and so it's just going to be fun. And that also proceeds will be benefiting Protect Our Aquifer. And then this QR code, if you want to zone in on this, and anybody at home right now, you can hold your phone up to it. That'll pull up our website. But our website is protectouraquifer.org. That little flyers I left for y'all has it on there. There's ways to sign up for our newsletter. You can get a yard sign. You can follow us on all your social media channels, and you can also donate online as well. So there's lots of ways to get involved, and our emails are how we kind of give you the action, how to get involved, and that's that. So questions, comments, the whole shebang.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
That was just great.
Thank you. water nerd.
Well, I think our water's in better hands with the water warrior in charge, so we're glad about that. But
Glad
as you
to
can
have
tell, there's a lot of threats and a lot of work to be done by those who care. Any questions for Sarah, or for me, but for Sarah? Yeah.
Didn't this come up in front of the city council before? I mean, didn't they have, if nothing else, discussion about it? And can you tell us a little bit about how that went?
Sure. So it's come and gone in front of City Council quite a few times. You know, with that study with University of Memphis, Caesar, and MLGW, they make regular reports to City Council. And the trick is there's no easy solution. And so City Council knows there's a need, and there's not a clear what should we do. So City Council has, you know, voted and passed that wellhead protection law, so that's on the books. They have an opportunity to pass this 1,500-foot setback this Tuesday, so that could be additional protections. There is another law that we are against unless it is amended drastically that actually, it's a long story, but it allows for crude oil pipelines in right-of-ways with no public input, no City Council involvement, and zero permits, which is the opposite. We're like, okay, if you're gonna do it, we need more information. We wanna see, are you financially stable company? Will you not abandon this and go bankrupt and leave it with us to deal with? You know, is it going through a well field? All of these things. So they've been doing bits and pieces, and it's really just been kind of at this learning stage for everybody as a community, really learning more about these issues and trying to determine how do you move forward.
I'm going to answer it a little bit differently. In front of the City Council since February, and they passed it on 2 readings, but will not put it to the vote in the 3rd reading. They do not have the courage to pass a simple ordinance that does 3 things. It says, protect our water, protect our land, and in addition to protect those who are most vulnerable in our city from industrial and environmental racism and impact for about 100 years. The City Council, for whatever reason, has chosen not to put that to the 3rd vote. It is just absolutely poor leadership. And it just takes 7 votes and we can have a fabulous ordinance. It is in front of them. It has been, we took insight from and revisions from MLG&W, FedEx. We took changes from the Chamber of Commerce. Everyone has said, we're fine with it. Just pass it. And they're not going to do it. And I want to say this as well. There's only one city on the globe that gets all of its water, of Memphis' size, that gets all of its water from the ground and sits on an active earthquake zone. We're it on the globe. And we can't pass a simple ordinance that says you can't put a high-pressure oil pipeline through our water. So if you care about this and want to get involved, you can come on November 2, you can speak up, you can be involved, you can help Sarah with her job. As you can see, she's an army of one. It's ferocious, but she's an army of one. And there's a lot of work to do. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the corporations do not care about Memphis and its water. Yeah.
Just for those of us who have our pens out or maybe at home, what is the name of that regulation that they won't pass? And see how many of us can send emails, show up on Tuesday maybe, but what is the name of that regulation you're trying to get passed?
I believe it's called Protect Our Aquifer.
That's easy to remember.
And I think it's something like SR 5492, I believe.
And it's a S94, 5794.
5794.
But that one's not going to be up for vote on Tuesday.
That's correct. That's right.
Which that one's been tabled, so it can come back with 7 votes, and if it gets 7 votes, then it's going to pass. But we don't have 7 votes on it.
Yeah, that's right. The one that's on Tuesday. So the Mayor Harris and Josh Whitehead from the Land Use Control Board drafted an ordinance that's just on their own. They just said you can't put a pipeline unless you have it set back 1,500 square feet from all of the places Sarah talked about. County Commission's already voted on it, passed it. It's gone to the City Council, and again, for whatever reason, it's a joint ordinance. City Council passed it once, passed it twice, and all ordinances have to go to 3 votes, and they continue to push it down the road. It's up for its final vote on Tuesday. I don't know if it's going to get passed or
Yeah,
not.
we really don't know. We think that constituent voices are going to be what pushes it over the edge. And I will say, if you go to our website, parishioner.org, and you click on the Now tab, then I would just bookmark that, because that's the page that we refresh the most with, like, what's just going on right now, what's the email to send, what's the thing to do right now. And there is, you can find all of those laws linked, so if you really want to have some riveting reading, you can read all of these ordinances. They're all linked on the page. And then we also have a one-click email that takes you straight to City Council. It has a little predefined, it's got all the information in there. You can send as is. We encourage people to add their own little personal note so that City Council knows, like, you are a real human and a constituent that cares. But that's a real easy way to just show your support and get the City Council to know that there are people in the community that are very aware, watching, and waiting for them to do what's right.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yep.
Just picking up on what you just said,
Sure.
I just wonder about if we know who the greatest friends and advocates on the City Council are, who needs a nudge in which direction, and or whether that's available on your website.
That's a great question. Dr. Jeff Warren has been one of our biggest friends. Yeah. So, you know, human health goes right in line with his work as a doctor, and water, clean water is for human health. So he's been one of our, you know, number ones. I would say Chase Carlisle always needs a little push. He's got some other interests.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And so he would be one. I would say another.
I think Worth Morgan could, because
Yeah.
he has a higher office envisioned. So
Yes.
I think he ought to be here. I think he ought to hear from potential voters.
Right. That's a
So
good
I
point.
think he's another good one.
And he's a very common sense guy and kind of goes with us, and then sometimes he doesn't, and he's somebody that could use a nudge.
And the head of the committee who these ordinances are going through is J.B. Smiley, who, as you may saw, is trying to run for governor. So he's also someone who you ought to say something about. Yep.
Well, I just want to say, this has been a fabulous presentation, and I think we all need a little push because it's our water.
It is.
And you're our spokespersons, and the water warrior, thank you very
Woo!
much.
Thank you all so much for your time. Thanks. All right, yeah, you had a question. Did you want to? You've been so patient. Oh, okay. Well, we can chat.